this is information that council will be looking at.
I'm just not so sure how personally, and I'm only speaking on my behalf, how much I can attach that survey to then providing us the direction of, are we going in the right direction with our taxation? That's just my own personal red flag. So that's my first question. Second, can you provide a historical explanation of why water, sewage, and garbage or refuse is separate? Because I think there has been some comments about it seems like Saanich is hiding or being deceitful as how it does it, because it is more than 3.25% if you look at a cumulative increase.
Thank you through the mayor to Councillor Plant. A number of years ago, and Saanich certainly wasn't alone in this, sewer and water were transferred over to user pay. It was a revenue shift, so that it really became about, and water conservation played into that as well. So the desire was to really sort of open the window or the door on water and utility costs and have them be separated so that it was more clear to see where the expenditures were and what the direct correlation in rate increases, rather than incorporating into an overall property tax increase and as I say, the user pay strategy behind water and sewer separated utility. The garbage being moved over onto the utility bill was a direct result of going to the composting program. So we now had carts that we were going to track their stand, they have the numbers. We're not able to do that within our property tax system, the actual software that bills for property taxes. Our utility billing software allows us to track carts and to manage that whole process on the utility bill. So it was really a functional decision to move that charge over to the utility bill so we could add all those extra things onto to provide that separated service.
Thank you for that. So as a subsequent to that question, do most municipalities do it that way, or do most municipalities have it collapsed into one amount?
From my work in certainly within the CRD, most have it separated out. I think the notable exception is Esquimalt, who has sewer as part of their overall property tax increase, and that's for very specific reasons because of the makeup of their municipality with the D&D property. So there are differences, but many municipalities are going to the user pay model for water and sewer. Some are even moving storm drain over to a user pay model based on permeable surface of their property. So there seems to be more of a shift towards user pay as opposed to shifting away from user pay.
Great. Last question, and it only came up because of Mr. Boyson's presentation and the talking about savings in hydro. Going through this whole document quite thoroughly, enjoying reading it and learning, where is the hydro shown? Where is the phone shown? The utilities that we spend? Because you don't see a line, or is there a line that I've missed it? Or is it just accommodated that with 20% of the workforce, they have 20% of the utility cost?
Through the Mayor and Councillor Plant, certainly all of the recreation facilities have their utilities for those specific buildings incorporated into their operational budgets. The municipal hall falls within the engineering department, I believe, and there's a facility operations department. So it's really facility driven.
So whatever the building kind of is under the jurisdiction of, look for that within there as an operating expense.
That's correct.
Thank you very much for answering all those questions. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
All right, 3 hands up. Councillor Brown, Councillor German, Councillor Marks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's for you to Ms. Tinney. I'm wondering, when we did the utility bill, the other thing that happened was we were able to capture provincial and federal properties that were paying property taxes. So through the utility bill process, we picked up some extra revenue for sewer and stuff because it became a utility bill. But what I'm hearing from people now is they're finding it onerous to get a big bill every 4 months. So has your department had any comments from residents that would prefer it either monthly or every 2 months? It just seems, people phone me up and say, I just got this $300 bill. And then they go on and I said, hold it, it's for these many months. So have you had any comments from residents about trying to make it not such a long period of a billing time?
Through the Mayor and Councillor Brown, none have flowed up to my office. I have not received any written complaints or formal complaints or comments coming through the utility billing department. For a municipality this size, the trimester billing is common. We bill every single day of, every business day of the year. To go to once a month would require a significant shift in our, in the way that we provide the service. That's a lot more bills to mail out, as it were. So that would be a challenge staffing-wise. It's one of those, we would actually need more staff in order to send out more bills, which would add to the costs. So, you know, we do encourage people to make installment payments. They're able to do that onto their utility accounts. They could set that up. So there are options. I fully recognize that, yes, now that we've gone to more charges on the utility bill. But I guess the comparator is the property tax is one really big bill one time of the year. So it's
And
one
going
of those
into
interesting
debate
ones,
that
right?
seniors can defer the property taxes, right?
Correct,
And that's-
correct.
I mean, they had to pay for garbage, but the rest now is all on this utility bill. So
Yes.
that's kind of where
Yes,
I'm
that is a
coming
shift.
from.
Councillor Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to comment in terms of the rising costs of utilities and some of the factors that are involved in there. First of all, utilities have been quite heavily hit with our decision to try to catch up with infrastructure costs for maintenance replacement that hadn't been adequately financed for in the past. So in that respect, current taxpayers are paying for past decisions where we really weren't maintaining the infrastructure or adequately funding its ultimate replacement. We are moving to that now and have substantially done so in water. Another factor is, of course, we've had a change in service where we are now having a different program of collecting waste and have had to equip for that. And a third factor is that those are two divisions, sewage and water, where we are not the direct initial provider entirely. We buy at a wholesale level from the regional water supply and then distribute. And so we have to incorporate any increases in pricing that they make. You and I are both on that board, actually. And on the other factor in the sewage issue, again, we are part of the regional or core area system. And I think most people are well aware of the costs that have been going on in anticipation or partial provision of the sewage treatment project, which threatens, of course, even much greater costs. But some of those costs have already appeared on tax bills, fairly substantial in nature. So I wanted the audience to be aware of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wortman, and then Murdoch.
Thank you, Mayor. I wonder if our finance department, or some of them, could meet with the city because they're planning on building a new fire hall at no cost to the taxpayer. And I think it would be some innovative financing here that we might learn from them. I say it flippantly. Coming back to our infrastructure deficit that we do have for our buildings, and we talk about looking at it, and I don't think we have. At what point do you see us taking a serious look at that?
Thank you through the Mayor to Councillor Portland. The facilities strategic plan is currently being worked on, and I believe within the next couple of months we'll have another update to council on the progress on that plan. That is when we will be able to see sort of the high level of what we're looking at for the coming 20 years. You will notice on the reserves page at the end of the budget document that we are building reserve funds for the future. Page 101. A couple of years ago, we established the facilities major repair and replacement reserve fund. Funds have been transferred over there. You'll see the balance projected at the end of December 2016 to be over $5 million. So we have been over the past couple of years doing those transfers to reserves to save up money for that very purpose.
For buildings.
For buildings, for building replacement.
Thank you. Another question that we've asked probably a number of times, and the community asked for it too, and I asked the question, is it realistic or possible for the budget draft to come out in October? Is it something that's doable?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Wortland, Under our current structure, it is not, so we would have to completely shift our, because we're on a rolling, as in the presentation I showed that we start. So we have a full year cycle, so to back up by 5 months would require significant effort to do that one-time reset. So it's not impossible, it would be very challenging.
Okay, I think it's worth saying because I believe a number of us in the community are basically saying, can we get it 3-4 months earlier? But if it's nearly impossible, then I think we have to address that part too. Thank you.
The other piece that I want to comment on that is that the earlier we do the budget, the larger the error bars on our estimates are. And that can be disturbing to the community as well, because we don't have enough detailed information in terms of year-end performance, in terms of numbers about growth, and those impacts to the budget that have a significant impact on the numbers. So it would, as Steve points out, require quite a significant reset. There's resource implications for that, and there's certainly workload implications given the work that we're asking the department to take on with the upgrades of our support systems now. It is something that's possible for the future, but it's not something that in the short term that I think we would be able to move very fast on. There's possibilities there, but again, even if we're able to implement that, we're into a situation where there's much more uncertainty in the numbers at that early stage.
I agree with you. And the only concern or question I have is that this has been talked about for a few years. But this is the first time comments like that have been made. And I think it's important when we ask for something and a community asks for something, I think we have to be able to say it is possible or it'd be very difficult. So I appreciate those comments. Coming back to the survey, the 625 interviewed, I don't know what the survey cost. There's only a certain kind of person, and I'm not one of them, that would talk for 20 minutes and answer a lot of questions. And I guess my question, is it a fairly accurate survey? Do we feel comfortable that it is fairly informative?
Carrie would likely have more information to add, but I'd like to just talk a little bit about surveys. Having spent quite a bit of time in my past experiences working on trying to gauge public opinion through the survey tools, they are as accurate as surveys can be. And it is a random sample, and there is a science to it. And the organizations that certainly formed that Saanich used in this last one are quite experienced in doing this in all sorts of different realms, including very experienced in local government. So it's about as accurate as we can make it. We could spend probably some more money on it and get the accuracy, the potential error narrowed down more, but that just increases the cost of the service. There's a balance there. It's another tool. It isn't the only tool, and I don't think council or the community should expect it to be the only tool that's driving how we're reacting to things in the budget in terms of gauging public support for things. But it is a tool that's used. It's a piece of information for council to use in terms of all of the information you take in and use to make your decisions. So I think it's an important tool. I think it is representative of public opinion, but it is just one aspect in your quiver of information in making decisions.
Okay. The result is 74% want the same level of service with unchanged taxes. I look at that and say, that's really helpful. And I ask, why would we want or ask or have a space for a response like that? I would much rather ask the question, would you want to pay the same taxes or higher taxes and have the same level of service, or pay less tax and have a poor level of service? That really hits it. But for 74% of the people to respond, that's something that really isn't possible. I don't think it tells us a whole lot. At least it doesn't tell me a whole lot, just a thought. One other question, would it be helpful to establish during a term of council a fixed figure for our surplus? A figure that we have to and need to keep to each year? But it's awfully tempting to go into the surplus and play with it each year. And that's just a question, would it be helpful, or do we need to play with it each year?
Through the Mayor to Council Berlin, if I understand what you're saying, is this about how much of the annual surplus you allocate to a specific project? So when we come forward with the surplus, we also talk about the accumulated surplus. So as long as that accumulated surplus is in a healthy position, then I can say to council, here are some of the options for that surplus. You always have the ability to not use the surplus from the prior year. Say we wanted to go to accumulated, you could transfer it all to a capital reserve if you didn't want to touch it further. So there's a variety of things that you can do with that surplus, and we bring that forward for consideration each year. So it's within council's purview to make those decisions on an annual basis.
Okay, but my question is, does the healthy level vary every year? Or is there a level that we should keep as a surplus and then reserve?
The accumulated surplus, that would not change year to year. That is a sort of a calculated amount, so it would not significantly shift from year to year.
Okay. One last question. If staff, as I listen to members of the public speak, there's some questions and concerns, and I also hear some misinformation, and I think it would help staff and the public if there's an opportunity during the course of the evening to pick up some of those questions that were asked or statements that maybe weren't entirely factual, to just clarify them. If that could be just worked in, I think we'd appreciate it. I would. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Murdoch, and then Haynes, and then Price.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Tinney, I was noting in your presentation on slide 16 earlier this evening, it specifically calls out the increase for the Greater Victoria Public Library. And I think this is the first time I've noticed that as being one of the drivers of the percentage increase. Obviously, there's several $1 million involved in funding the library, but it just kind of seemed out of context with the rest of our operating and core increases. So maybe if you could just help me understand the context there, and maybe there isn't one. Maybe the library is just a one-off that's unlike any other thing.
Thank you to Councilor Murdoch through the Mayor. It is a unique entity in the municipal realm. We have historically just rolled it into the general municipal increase. This is a new way of presenting it this year to show that this is, council adopts the budget from the library, but you don't have ultimate control. You have representation on that board, but this is not an area that council could look to and make a decision about that budget. It comes forward for approval. So it is a bit of a different entity of all of the other bits and pieces that are within the budget. So that's why it's been separated out this year.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Without recalling off the top of my head what the ask is from the library this year, what this indicates to me is that its ask is responsible for an additional 0.14% increase on the total property tax increase, average property tax increase. Am I reading that correctly?
Through the Mayor. So the library budget, it actually shows on page 67 of the budget document. So that's where we can see the full impact of it. The 0.14 is the taxation impact. It's not the actual increase in their budget. So their budget is just over $5 million, going from $5.2 million in 2015 to $5.4 in 2016. So it's an increase of 2.77% of the library budget increase.
Okay, thank you. That was the context I was looking for. It shows up here, and because it hasn't been there in the past, it just looked to me like something's going on with the library. And as I sit on the library board, that was news to me. So it's helpful context to see that the actual increase to Sandwich is 2.77% over what they asked us for last year. So,
that's correct.
okay, thank you very much.
Councilor Haynes, and then Price.
I'd like to come back and visit Councillor Wordland's suggestion on the earlier presentation of the budget. We have, as a council, forwarded the budget question of public education, public participation back to the FAP committee, and there's some questions around whether that should be staffed or contracted out, or perhaps taken with a different view. So in terms of what was said today, that by coming forward earlier, it impacts difficultly, has a difficult impact on the current system of financial planning, because in the early months of September, October, when the community are asking, could they look at the numbers then, there's a wider error band. There's a wider range of figures because of the uncertainty in the budget planning. That said, there's an offset by addressing or meeting some community expectations or desires to see those figures earlier. So I'm wondering if there a conversation could be had, perhaps at FAP, in terms of what would those figures look like. There's certainly the historic budgets of previous years to give a guidelines. And what is the aim of the public consultation? Is it to determine the final budget, or is it to suggest areas of importance and to improve public understanding? So in the case of a wider error band, that to me would not be so troubling if there was a little bit of explanation, annotation to say, this is a wide error band. In previous years it's been this. We expect these numbers to be tightened up. And then to weigh that against the request from the public for improved early information on the budget. I would just like to leave that as a comment with staff, and maybe that's something we can look at FAP, but I'd like to have it out there amongst our colleagues as well. Thank you.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's precisely the sort of tack that I was going to take too on this issue about the early budgeting process. I think sometimes we tend to get things way more complicated and way more expensive than we need to. We have to kind of go back to basics. And I agree. I think that the interest from the public of getting engaged early isn't to get into the precision of the numbers. And I totally understand the staff's response, because obviously anyone from the finance department or from senior staff want to make sure that all numbers going out are accurate and not misleading. But I could envision an exercise where you basically use the previous year almost as a platform, and with some notes showing trends, changes, things that were about to happen in the next year. From what I've heard from the public and their desire to get into the budget early, it's to give more general policy direction earlier, not to make sure that the columns add up or even what the totals are. I think it's a more of an exercise in wanting to engage in understanding where we are, and then contemplating some of the themes in the coming year, some of the suggested changes, allowing them to react to that, so that some of that consensus could be built into some of that preliminary budget. So I, like Councillor Haynes would say, let us not be deterred from early budget examination because of the very issues that were raised about being able, for the accuracy and so on. Because I don't think, as I hear it, that that's really the key message that we're getting from the public.
Thank you. Councillor Dermott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All sounds good, but I think this is potentially a case of being careful what you ask for. If you're starting to talk about having the public input influence policy direction, then you don't want it to start in late October with a draft budget. You're way past that at that time. You want to do it sometime in May if you're really seriously going to do that. And I don't think you even want to do that every year. If you are looking at more time for the public to study the draft budget, you could probably put it out at the end of November or early December or something like that to accomplish that. But even the draft budget is going to be substantially the figures for the decisions on policy that have been made and been directed to staff long, long before. So if somebody thinks or gives the impression to the public they're gonna come along in late October or the middle of October and start to suggest policy changes for that budget year is just to ask for one great, huge, very difficult mess, and for false expectations of the public and extreme difficulties for staff. I would love to see the public have opportunities to talk about policy in the budget. That's just not the right time at all, in my view.
On the same topic, Councilor Rowland? Or perhaps a different one?
Just picking up on that, I just say let's keep it simple, but I think even coming back and asking and using SCAN as a sounding board, and just asking them, sitting down and saying, what is it you're really looking for? And just finding out what they're looking for and what is possible, and go from there. I think we should keep it simple. Thanks.
If I may, Mr.
Go
Mayor,
ahead.
so council has had, a fair bit of discussion about the potential for public participation in the budget process. We've been through probably 3 cycles or so of reports from staff about the implications and the costs associated with that. And although I pointed out the challenge with earlier budgeting numbers and the potential inaccuracies in that, this is one piece. The other piece is that it's just a resourcing perspective, and that's why the reports have said what they've said when they've come back, is that if we're going to do this, if we're going to find out, spend the time that's necessary and the energy and resources that's necessary to understand what the community wants to hear in terms of the budget or participate in terms of the budget, there's resource implications to that. Our staff are tasked with the operations of running the financial system, and in this near term, tasked with replacing our entire financial software to support our organization. Adding the additional layer at this point in time is a challenge, and that's why the reports have come back saying, if you want to do that, that's entirely appropriate, correct, all about openness and transparency, and from a staff perspective, we absolutely agree and support that. However, what we want council to be aware of is that there are implications in terms of resources in order to implement that and make it happen. So we're back to a referral to FAP. I think there's lots of discussion to happen about that. There was a motion made and a suggested direction. I think there's lots of discussion that needs to happen around that motion as well. I think this is an important area. I think there's lots of opportunity for change and involvement in the community in the budgeting process. We just have to look for the right timing and what's supportable in terms of resourcing to make it happen appropriately.
Any more discussion? Should we wrap up? Actually, we need to move back in camera to finish our business from earlier, so I'll look for a motion to move in camera under sections 91A, C, and I of the Community Charter. Second, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That motion carries unanimously. Good work.